Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Nate here. And the new Fallout TV show opens up with a brief flashback to a pre-war birthday party occurring just moments before the bombs begin to fall. During this scene, we get a chance to overhear the following news report on a radio before the device is unceremoniously shut off by an annoyed guest.
Negotiations were scheduled to continue today as the White House had no comment about the president's whereabouts.
No comment on the president's whereabouts. Now, of course, we know that the president is in hiding, bunkered down for what he knows is about to happen. But this little broadcast begs the additional question, who exactly was that president? Who was the last man or whoa man to rule the United States before the Great War? Well, my search across the Fallout franchise for an answer to that question led me to some pretty wild and unexpected places. As while the developers have long avoided providing us with a conclusive explanation, if you look carefully throughout the games, and especially their files, you'll find that we've been left an interesting little trail of clues that reveals much more than you may be prepared to learn about America's mysterious last president. Thus, in today's video, we're going to be analyzing the Fallout franchise game by game and assessing what each one exposes about his final excellency, and then trying to tie it all together. So, without any further ado, let's do further. But first, quick word from today's video sponsor. Stunlock Studios. The official release of V Rising is finally here. Experience a vampire survival action RPG adventure like no other. Rise from your grave after centuries of slumber and hunt for blood to regain your power. Explore a vast, open world of dark fantasy. Face humans and monsters alike, and worse, the deadly sunlight. Unleash your creativity, build your own unique gothic castle. Don't forget to craft a coffin for your well-deserved rest after a long, sinful night. Hunt alone or gather a clan. V Rising can be played both solo or co-op with friends. In a world of conflict, be the vampire who reigns supreme. Do you dare challenge the throne of Dracula? V Rising is out now on Steam. The PlayStation 5 version is just around the corner. Check the links in the description below. Alright, so before we dive into the thick of the games themselves, first a bit of preamble is warranted to go over some basic facts, or at least reasonable assumptions we should make that can help aid us in answering our fundamental question. For one, given the United States' 4-year presidential terms, the most recent election prior to the Great War in the Fallout universe should have occurred in November of 2076, with the winner not actually being inaugurated until January of 2077, just 9 months before the bombs fell. Of course, the winner of this election could have been an incumbent seeking re-election, which would mean that they could have first been elected in November of 2072, beginning term 1 in January of 2073. So our candidate could have been in power for anywhere between 9 months or a little over 4.5 years in the lead up to the conflict, according to the American Constitution as we currently understand it. Of course, Fallout exists in a timeline of its own, and it's entirely possible that in this universe, the 22nd Amendment, which governs presidential term limits, was repealed, never passed, or is just blatantly ignored by the present time. So we shouldn't necessarily consider these assumptions to be canon fact, rather just references that might help guide us to where we're going. Anyway, with those dates in mind, let's proceed to what the actual games themselves imply. Alright, so Fallout 1 keeps its cards pretty close to its chest when it comes to details about the pre-war American government. Remember, the game was released in 1997, and the Enclave wasn't even a thing yet. Still, there are some interesting hints to developments in the pre-war political landscape. First and foremost, the American flags we see displayed at several bases and government facilities look quite a bit different than the one you or I may be familiar with. Rather than 50 road homogeneous stars, its canton features 13 small stars orbiting a larger central one, kinda like the Betsy Ross flag, just with a larger star in the middle. In-game sources don't really elaborate at all on the reason for this divergence, Some holotapes vaguely allude to like a new structure for the states or something, but forum posts by the developers and later clarification in future games reveals that the reason for this change is that in the Fallout timeline, the United States divided and organized its 50 states into 13 separate commonwealths, which formed a new layer of government between federal and state authority. The old 50 states seem to still exist in some capacity. Certain posters and newspaper articles allude to them, and later on we'll talk about governors who we can hear about. But much of their relevance and authority seems to have been diminished and transferred to these new commonwealths. In 2004, after leaving Interplay but before joining Obsidian, future New Vegas project director and lead designer Josh Sawyer began work on an unofficial, seemingly unlicensed, Fallout tabletop role-playing game, and produced this map of the existing American Commonwealths for it. Sawyer eventually canceled his tabletop experiment and went to work at Obsidian, but hilariously, in the first episode of the new Fallout TV show, that exact same map of the Commonwealths is actually used as a backdrop of a pre-war weather report that we see early in the first episode, which appears to officially canonize the Commonwealth system and Sawyer's rough draft of the boundaries for it. Now, this is all relevant to our discussion, because the introduction of the 13 Commonwealths, and perhaps an implied decline in the relevance of individual states, may carry some big implications for how the president is chosen, and even the broader composition of Congress. In the United States as we know it, electoral college as well as congressional seats belong to the individual states, right? But this new Commonwealth system may very well have shaken that old process up. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but in Fallout 4, we can visit the old Massachusetts State House, where the Massachusetts legislature used to convene, and there's a plaque there that ominously reads as follows, quote, "The state government used this building continuously until the formation of the 13 Commonwealths in 1969, end quote. This statement, 1, confirms that the Commonwealth system was adopted in 1969, and 2, may imply that the old state legislatures were disbanded after the new regime took effect. I mean, why else would you vacate the state legislature? Possibly indicating that state electoral power has shifted to the new commonwealths. You know, constitutionally, the mandate for congressional districting and electoral college appointments rests with the state legislatures. But if those state legislatures are now gone, that raises some questions. Anyway, as we proceed with our investigation, we'll return to these abstract questions regarding America's new political organization. But for now, let's move on from the subject of monotonous hypothetical constitutional reforms and move on to what Fallout 2 reveals about the American presidency. Because this is where things really start to get good. Set 80 years after the events of Fallout 1 in 2241, Fallout 2 follows the story of the Chosen One, the old Vault Dweller's grandchild, and introduced the Enclave to the franchise as the game's primary antagonist. As we learn, in the lead-up to the Great War, several high-ranking American politicians, likely including the president himself, we'll get to that, and various businessmen and corporate executives fled to a number of hidden bunkers and locations across America, with the plan to wait out the bombs and eventually return to reassert control over the wasteland. The most important of these hideouts was the Poseidon Energy Oil Rig, also known as Control Station Enclave, 175 miles west of the coast of California, where it seems the most important pre-war figures fled, and the site continues to function as the sort of de facto Enclave capital. During the events of Fallout 2, we discover that the Enclave is planning to release a series of bioweapons upon the wasteland, to cleanse it of what they call subhumans, before beginning a vicious reconquest of America. And the Chosen One will eventually storm the Poseidon Energy Oil Rig and destroy it, taking the flower of the Enclave down with its capital. Anyway, as we're on the Poseidon Energy Rig, while disguising ourselves as an Enclave soldier, we actually get a chance to meet the Enclave's president, an unimpressive man named Mr. Richardson, and our ensuing conversation with him is quite relevant to the purposes of this video. Much of his dialogue is just villainous monologuing about how much he hates irradiated people, but occasionally he slips up and says some quite illuminating things. Mr. Richardson claims to have been elected in the year 2220, and thus far has served more than 5 consecutive terms, suggesting that the 22nd Amendment and its term limits are now a thing of the past, or never were a thing of the present to begin with. 2220 also fits in with the expected timeline of 4-year presidential elections in terms. In theory, there should have been about 31 elections and terms served since the most recent 2076 one. Furthermore, President Richardson also regularly alludes to the existence of some sort of enclave Congress, which is evidently the body that elected him in the first place. Seeing as there are no state legislatures or obvious congressional districts left in the wasteland, it's not at all obvious how these congressmen are themselves getting elected or what political mandates they have. Is there still a House and a Senate? Is the body now unicameral? What's going on here? It's unclear. Additionally, His Excellency also mentions the existence of a vice president, who we can later visit, named Daniel Byrd. Unfortunately, however, the Veep seems to have once volunteered for some kind of scientific experiment, and it left his mental faculties permanently reduced. Now he doesn't do much but stand around his desk, so there's that. But evidently, in the aftermath of the Great War, Veeps and something of a line of constitutional succession continues to exist. Moving off of the Poseidon Energy oil rig, Fallout 2 also makes a couple direct, though somewhat cheeky, references to the final American presidents, and seems to allude to their own membership in the Enclave, as well as a little bit more. Northwest of New Reno is the Sierra Army Depot, an old pre-war military installation, where we can access a holodisk containing the transcripts of various Galaxy News radio broadcasts that were played before the bombs fell, and several of these transcripts directly reference the ancient POTUS. The broadcast played February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2075, reads, quote, "History was made today as Canada, by popular demand of its citizens, agreed to be annexed by the U.S. The president is quoted as saying, quote, 'Canada is one of the world's greatest sources of hockey players,' end quote, and will be a welcome addition to the U.S. In return, sources say Canada will receive a full 10% of the world's remaining supply of oil, controlled exclusively by the U.S., as well as a 50% reduction in taxes, since they now fall under U.S. tax law." End quote. Nothing super revealing here. The American annexation of Canada is well documented in the Fallout universe, and is literally how Fallout 1 opens up. However, the next day's transcript, dated February 15th, 2075, reveals something a little less expected. Quote, "In a stunning display of solidarity, the House of Representatives and Congress both voted unanimously to impeach the president for jaywalking. Both houses stated that the president is not above the law and should have known better than to jaywalk. Both sides deny this had anything to do with the recent annexation of Canada." End quote. So, on February 15th, 2075, the President of the United States was formally impeached by the House of Representatives and Congress in a bipartisan vote for jaywalking. Now, remember, the last election before the Great War doesn't actually occur until November of 2076, nearly a year and a half after this alleged impeachment. So, unless they defeated the charges and were re-elected, this individual may very well not have been the last commander-in-chief. It's also unclear if the president was removed from office over this tort. Impeachment by the House of Representatives merely means that the president is now formally being charged with the crime by the lower body of Congress. And from there, the Senate will then hear the case and decide whether or not to convict and remove them from office. In American history as we know it, only 3 presidents so far have been impeached, and none of them have actually been convicted or removed by the Senate. However, the GNN transcript explicitly calls out the bipartisan nature of this inquiry and its broad popularity in Congress, which would make it much more likely that the Senate would convict and remove them. Additionally, the way the holodisk says the president was impeached by both the House of Representatives and Congress is a little sus. Like you can only be impeached by the House of Representatives. The Senate doesn't do the impeaching, they do the convicting. So maybe this holodisk means to imply that both houses of Congress acted against the president and they're getting removed, but that's not specified. Whatever the case, according to this transcript, it's possible, perhaps even likely, that more than a year away from the 2076 election, the last president was removed from power, though it's not obvious whether or not that happened. Notably, the use of the term bipartisan also indicates that the American two-party system is still going strong at this point, though I don't think that's much of a surprise. Unfortunately, the next and last radio transcript we can read from this holotape isn't dated until about a year later, March 30th of 2076, though it's certainly worth reading. Quote, "Today the president ordered the Pacific Fleet to the Poseidon deep-sea oil derrick, located at a secret location out in the Pacific. He cited concerns over that military exercises staged by the Chinese fleet are unacceptably close to our strategic oil reserves. The Chinese government denied any hostile intentions. A recent poll suggests that 54% of GNN viewers think that the president is using this as a diversionary tactic to take the public's eye off the president's recent admission to having multiple extramarital affairs with campaign staffers. Our poll also suggests that 70% don't care about these affairs and are happy with the way the president is running the country. A whopping 60% also think he should keep having these affairs if that's what it takes to keep the country running smoothly." End quote. So this entry suggests a couple of things about the president in 2076. One, he was actively positioning the Pacific Fleet to defend the Poseidon Energy oil rig, which heavily implies he was a member of the Enclave personally. And two, it confirms that this leader was a male, given the references to his affairs. Now, mind you, 2076 is still an election year. A new election should occur in November, and the winner sworn in January. So, the president this holodisk is referring to may not even necessarily be the last president unless he wins re-election. Wartime presidents do tend to win big, and given that this guy seems to be a member of the Enclave, it's not unlikely that some unconstitutional strings could be pulled to ensure his victory. So, it's still possible that he is. Alright, so that about does it for what the GNN transcripts expose, and at this point we've covered most of what Fallout 2 has to reveal, though we'll circle back to this game in good time. For now, let's move on to what we can learn from Fallout 3. Perhaps the most obvious place to begin searching for the last president's whereabouts in a game like Fallout 3 would be his residence, as indeed the White House is a location we can visit in the DC area, though it's undergone a bit of an unfortunate makeover. Indeed, it seems as though the Chinese were able to secure a direct hit on the American White House during the Great War, turning it into a mere crater, inhabited by a handful of skeletons and glowing one feral ghouls. Now, the big question I had when visiting this place as like a 3rd or 4th grader in 2008 was if any of these skeletons or feral ghouls happened to have at one point been the president. Right? Clearly, the Chinese scored a bullseye on the high office, but was the president there to feel the blast? Well, Fallout 2 really avoids answering this question. There are no terminals or holotapes in the White House ruins that give us any insight, and I think Bethesda wanted to leave his status as ambiguous as possible. That said, we can be pretty confident that the president wasn't home when the bombs fell. Again, getting ahead of myself here, but there are some terminal entries in Fallout 4, which we'll get to shortly, which confirm that the president had already fled to a safe zone months before the Great War. And you'll recall the new Fallout TV show, again, opens with a pre-war broadcast that mentions the president being missing from the White House the day the bombs fall. So he almost certainly made it out. Moving away from Pennsylvania Avenue, northwest of DC proper is Fort Constantine, a large military base dedicated to the storage, maintenance, and ultimately the use of several American nuclear ICBMs. Within Fort Constantine's commanding officer's office, hidden in a locked safe, players can actually steal the site's nuclear launch codes and upload them to a terminal to read. The launch code transcript reveals that on the day of the Great War, an executive, codenamed Bagman, ordered Fort Constantine's nuclear birds in the air to retaliate. It sure sounds like Bagman may just be the last president's military call sign. It's generally assumed in the United States that the only guy who can order or clear a nuclear strike legally is the president himself, so he's the most likely candidate. Now, we don't hear much more about this Bagman figure in Fallout 3. He just appears in the launch code somewhere and boom, ploosh, gone. However, his name will come up again later in our investigation, and let me just say right now that he has been the source of a tremendous amount of my stress lately. We'll get there, though. Moving away from Fort Constantine, something else that stuck out to me were these giant metal statues and busts that we can find all over DC's urban ruins, and especially around old government buildings. These pieces of artwork are known as Art Deco reliefs, and this style was actually incredibly popular in America throughout the Roaring 20s up until the 40s. In our timeline, they sort of fall out of fashion after the Second World War, but clearly they've maintained their relevancy in the Fallout universe. In previous videos, I've talked about how Fallout 4 kind of associates them with a broader Lovecraftian subplot and suggests that there's an occult meaning behind them, seeing as we find one buried underneath ancient Dunwich ruins and whatnot. Go check out our latest iceberg for more information on this subject. However, up until Fallout 4's release in 2015, I don't think they were ever meant to have any supernatural or eldritch connotations. I think they were just meant to symbolize more terrestrial decoration, and Bethesda just decided to include them in the Lovecraft stuff with Fallout 4 because they look spooky. Anyway, this Art Deco stuff also appeared in Fallouts 1 and 2. We, in fact, especially saw a lot of it on Poseidon Energy's oil rig at the climax of Fallout 2. However, the exact faces and styles used were so undescriptive and featureless, it was difficult to find any esoteric meaning or symbolism behind them. They don't appear to have been depicting real people, but rather were just a generic continuation of the old 1900s tradition. However, some, really two, of Fallout 3's Art Deco statues are different. Two of the Art Deco reliefs we see across the Capital Wasteland have clearly been modeled to reflect real people who likely played a big role in the society that decided to immortalize them. The first of these two that we'll discuss is an almost full-body statue of an elderly, balding man wearing a proper suit and tie with a very menacing look on his face. This statue is referred to in the game files as Urban Statue 01, and will be referred to by me as Grouchy Face. Grouchy Face can be found all around DC proper, but especially within the ruins of the old US Capitol building. Like, it's impossible not to notice. The halls of Congress are filled with, 15 copies of this same Grouchy Face statue. Whoever this man was, he was almost certainly a popular president or congressional figure. The second particularly descriptive Art Deco relief is the bust of a much younger but still mature male, with a square face and a receding, though not quite balding hairline, and an unfathomably strong brow. Named by the files as Urban Statue Head 02, though who I'm going to call Old Homelander. Like Grouchy Face, Old Homelander reliefs can be found across the urban DC ruins, though his presence in one particular DLC region of the game has me convinced of his executive position. You see, released in September of 2009, Fallout 3's Broken Steel DLC expanded the events of the game's main story with a bit of an epilogue. Evidently, after the destruction of the Enclave HQ at Raven Rock and their AI president, John Henry Eden, some remnants of the Enclave retreated and regrouped at the old Adams Air Force Base around 12 miles southwest of DC, and the Lone Wanderer would be asked by the Brotherhood of Steel to join them on one final assault on Enclave forces, to snuff them out for good this time. Well, the way we would access this Adams Air Force Base where the Enclave were hiding out wasn't by vertibird or highway. Instead, the player and many of the Brotherhood of Steel attackers would make use of an old, secret presidential train line that ran underneath the White House directly to Adams' AFB, called the Presidential Metro. And all over this metro station, we see that same urban statue head 02 or old Homelander bust in very authoritative positions. Like, they have his face next to flags, sometimes it's almost like there are shrines to him. There's like 4 or 5 of these guys in the presidential metro. This guy was likely a president. Perhaps the president who built this hidden facility, or who had some kind of relationship with Adams' AFB. Admittingly, even if Grouchy Face or Old Homelander were created in the image of past American presidents, that doesn't necessarily mean either was the last president themselves, but I still thought this was something worth emphasizing. Anyway, that's enough of the Capital Wasteland for now. Let's move on to the Commonwealth and see what Fallout 4 may tell us about His Excellency and the final days of the last American government. So, I already got a little ahead of myself and mentioned how in Fallout 4, some plaques found at the Massachusetts State House suggest that in 1969, the legislature was either moved or entirely disbanded after the creation of a new Commonwealth system. And this building in particular ceased housing the state legislature, which is a big deal, but we've already talked about the constitutional implications and what that might mean. So, I'd rather not dwell on this subject for very long. However, something that I didn't mention earlier is that it seems as though whenever the state Congress moved out or dissolved, members of the state executive office moved in, as a series of terminal entries reveal that the state treasurer, lieutenant governor, and several additional officials had offices in the State House building. We specifically learned that in the days leading up to the Great War, Massachusetts' lieutenant governor, a man known as Lieutenant Governor Graham, attempted something of a coup and had himself declared the Provisional Governor of Massachusetts, enforcing martial law in the state and ordering people who couldn't prove they weren't communists to face the highest punishment. Funnily enough, there's actually a random encounter we can have in the Wasteland, where we stumble upon a Mr. Gutsy trying to enforce the old lieutenant governor/governor's curfew, and will attack the player for being out past it. Graham's brief dictatorship seems to have ended the moment the bombs fell, but his power play we can read about does confirm that the states still have their own executive branches. Independent of the new Commonwealth system, the states still have their own governors, the lieutenant governors, treasurers, all that stuff, even if the status of their legislatures remains ambiguous. Another location besides the State House of equal, perhaps greater interest to our investigation in Fallout 4 is the Boston Bugle building, located north of Goodneighbor in downtown Boston. This place once served as the primary office of the Boston Bugle daily newspaper, which was once among the largest and most influential on the American East Coast. Within these offices, we can actually read a copy of the last Boston Bugle issue ever sent out to print, dated between October 19th and 23rd of 2077. The issue features 5 separate articles, and of these articles, one titled, "White House Remains Empty, Where is Our President?" written by a certain staff writer named Mags Vecchio, is particularly relevant to our investigation. It reads, quote, "For more than half a year, the West Wing of America's most famous residence has remained shrouded in near complete darkness. A skeleton crew of manual laborers remains on staff to maintain the property, but nobody has lived or worked politically there for several months. And even though the White House press corps was unofficially and unceremoniously disbanded around the same time, the media has remained steadfast in answering that most important of questions. Where is our president?" At first, the assumption was that the entirety of the United States government had moved operations to Raven Rock, the military operations center located in the mountainous region of Pennsylvania, just a few miles northeast of the presidential retreat in Camp David, Maryland. But further investigations have revealed that neither the president nor his cabinet have been to the Raven Rock complex in over a year. So, if not Raven Rock, then where? Thanks to an extensive and exhaustive investigation, the Boston Bugle has uncovered the answer, and our readers will likely consider it as strange as it is shocking. The president has been leading our country from a Poseidon Energy oil rig just off the coast of San Francisco. It's certainly an odd choice for a presidential command center, or is it? Not as much as it may seem, as our investigation has discovered, thanks to the testimony of a highly placed anonymous source, wonder who, the Boston Bugle has learned that the official designation of the oil rig is actually Control Station Enclave, giving credence to the long-running rumors of a secret, militarized shadow government known as the Enclave that would take control of the United States in the event of a nuclear confrontation. And so, the mystery of the missing president has finally been solved. But in doing so, has the Bugle also uncovered evidence that the end of the world, in the form of total atomic war, is also at hand? Sadly, the president's silence seems to speak volumes. End quote. So, this Boston Bugle report, published just days before the bombs fell, reveals that the last president had been missing for more than half a year leading up to the day of the Great War, and had been hiding out on the Poseidon Energy oil rig. This seems to about officially confirm that the last president and his cabinet were founding members of the Enclave, which is by no means a huge surprise, but it's something we couldn't really definitively say for sure up until now. Now we can be confident that the day the bombs fell, virtually the entire American executive branch were hunkered down, safe and sound, ready to begin leading the Enclave. The same president who led the United States through the last days of the Great War survived the bombs, and the day after it he woke up and probably continued calling himself president. The article also specifies the old president's abandonment of the country to have occurred over half a year ago at the time of publication in late October. So he probably fled sometime in March or April of 2077, which seems to coincide well with a big theory around the leaking of FEV research. You see, in the Fallout community, there's this everlasting debate over who shot first, who initiated the Great War, and there's all sorts of theories and ideas blaming different parties, and Bethesda's kind of played a little with all of them. However, to the original creators of the Fallout franchise at Interplay Entertainment, the cause of the Great War and who started it aren't really a mystery at all. It was China. China shot first, though there was a method to their madness. You see, what made China pull the trigger, according to various forum posts by series co-creator Tim Cain and writer Chris Avellone, was when the Chinese discovered that American scientists were tinkering with the forced evolutionary virus, a bioweapon that the US intended to deploy to create super soldiers in its war. According to Chris Avallone's Fallout Bible, China finds out about American FEV research in March of 2077, right around the same time this Boston Bugle article claims the president fled the White House. Upon discovering the FEV project, China demanded that the United States terminate the project, and the US promised to do so, but secretly ignored the request and just continued as planned a bit more secretly, which ultimately led to the enraged Chinese government flipping the board over and firing 6 months later in October. Here's Tim Cain describing the events in a recent interview with TKs-Mantis.
And also, we don't come across as good as the reason we got nuked is bio weapons were illegal, and somehow China found out we were doing FEV, and they're like, you have to stop it, and we went, okay, and all we did is move it. All we did is move it over
Earth-shattering,
to the
what you just said.
Really? Is that stuff people don't know?
Well, people actually debate over who shot first, like a
they do?
solo thing.
Oh, well, then I don't know. Who knows? It was probably some rogue
well,
nation.
that movie they were making.
Now, keep in mind, pretty much all of this FEV caused the Great War lore and stuff has been communicated by Interplay in forum posts and unofficial blogs or interviews. The games themselves never necessarily confirm this. However, Interplay does consistently place the date of the FEV discovery in March of 2077, roughly the same time the Boston Bugle mentions the president's flight, so Bethesda may very well be going with this. As mentioned, there are some additional articles featured in this terminal, and their topics fluctuate between describing the great heroic victories of the US military against China and how the war will be over any minute now, and then to news reports describing the latest food riots to have overtaken the city. It's a bleak picture and invites all sorts of speculation on how the US was faring in its final days. Whatever the case, little additional insights on the Commander-in-Chief or broader state of the government are offered by Fallout 4. So, let's move on to the newest installment in the game series, Fallout 76. So, as far as lore on the old United States government is concerned, Fallout 76 offers us an unparalleled amount of insight, though that comes with an equally unparalleled amount of new questions. First things first, all around Appalachia, we can find political campaign posters. Evidently, a few months before the bombs fell, a local senator named Sam Blackwell, who we'll talk a little bit about later, resigned his seat early, and thus a special election was scheduled for November, and candidates began campaigning. Now, take a look at these posters. Notice what they say. Special election for Senator of the Appalachian Territories, not Senator of West Virginia. Furthermore, throughout the game, we learn about the region's last governor, Governor Evans. We're going to do this draw for the rest of the video, who was this ultra-corrupt champion of automation. But he's not referred to as the governor of West Virginia, but rather the governor of the Appalachian Territories. It seems as though that the political entity that was West Virginia has all but been replaced by the Appalachian Territories, and this is likely a consequence of that Commonwealth system we mentioned earlier. My suspicion is that the Eastern Commonwealth drawn up by Josh Sawyer on his map is now called the Appalachian Territories, which makes some sense. The Appalachian Mountains do run through West Virginia to Pennsylvania and parts of New York State, though New Jersey's inclusion is a bit odd. The special election for Blackwell's Senate seat may also confirm that states are no longer sending delegates to Congress. Now it's the Commonwealths themselves electing senators and representatives, which has obvious electoral implications. Speaking of Governor Evans, we can actually break into his office in the Charleston Capitol building, and on his desk will be a note titled, "Letter from the President." And it's one of the most controversial notes in the Fallout franchise. Let's read it. Governor Evans, the President and Secretary of Defense would like to extend their thanks to you for your continued support of our armed forces. Keeping the supply of steel, coal, and other materials vital to the war effort flowing smoothly is the responsibility of every freedom-loving American, and the liberation of Anchorage would not have been possible without them. Several cabinet members have expressed admiration for the economic policies you have put in place that have allowed for such leaps in automation, and the expediency with which you have quelled dissent. We would like to extend a formal invitation to you, as well as other political and industrial leaders from the region, to a summit that is being organized to discuss how such technology can be spread. Now, here's the thing. These days, as of 2024, that's all this note says, right? What we just read. But before Fallout 76's big 2020 Wastelanders update, there was a faded signature on this letter that read, quote, "Sincerely, D, Office of the President," end quote. Now, again, this faded signature was removed by Bethesda in 2020, so it's hard to consider it canon anymore, but many 76 players continue to believe that D, the person who signed this letter, was the president himself. Perhaps that was his nickname, or hey, maybe it was his actual name. I'll be honest, I never really thought much of this note. You'll notice it's coming from the office of the president, and to me, it seems much more likely that this was written by some junior-level staffer or cabinet member rather than the commander-in-chief himself. And I suspect the reason why Bethesda removed it was people got a little carried away with the speculation. Anyway, moving on. One of the more dramatic revelations that comes midway through Fallout 76's main questline is the work that we find out the Enclave was doing shortly before our release from the Vault. You see, as it turns out, in the days before the Great War, the US government constructed a massive bunker beneath the White Springs Resort in West Virginia, or the Appalachian Territories, as it's known, as a safe place for Congress to retreat when the bombs came. Much of this project was delegated to the Presidential Secretary of Agriculture, a deranged man named Thomas Eckhart, who was secretly ordered by the president to use the White Springs bunker for some of that FEV testing we mentioned earlier. During 76's main questline, we find out that the old senator who resigned, Sam Blackwell, had actually begun to figure out what the government was doing and tried to blow the whistle on the whole Enclave thing. However, he was threatened and forced into resignation and hiding. Anyway, when the bombs began to fall, the president was of course safe and sound at Poseidon Oil Rig, or at least supposedly. We'll get to that. But contrary to the old Boston Bugle article we read, several of his cabinet officials, including Agriculture Secretary Urquhart, were still on the East Coast upon receiving the early warning signal, and fled to the White Springs bunker. Now, here's where things get fun. Most of the American Congress and several cabinet officials, including the Attorney General and Secretary of Defense, were deliberately removed from the early warning system and couldn't make it to White Springs in time. Those congressmen who did show up anyway were liquidated on the orders of Eckhart. Oddly enough, after arriving at White Springs, the Enclave personnel who did make it were unable to establish comms with Raven Rock or the Poseidon Oil Rig. They were entirely isolated. It's subtly hinted that Eckhart may have deliberately severed communications with the rest of the Enclave in a bid to secure more power for himself. Right? If you can't hear the president, what they're saying at Raven Rock, then you got your own little command center, right? Anyway, Eckhart eventually stages and wins a somewhat rigged election to have himself declared president of this White Springs-only Enclave, and goes crazy trying to take over the nuclear silos in Appalachia. You see, since the nuclear silos didn't actually recognize Eckhart's authority, he needed to artificially raise the DEFCON level, which he did by unleashing all sorts of biological horrors on the area, hence the Scorch Plague, the Scorch Beast, etc. But Eckhart was eventually killed in a mutiny, as his soldiers got sick of him, and then those mutineers were either killed themselves or driven out of White Springs by its AI defense system. Such is the fate of the Appalachian Enclave. We learn all of this in 76 when we sneak into the White Springs bunker and trick the AI and its defenses into thinking we're legitimate members of the faction, and from there can run hog wild learning about this cursed authoritarian nonsense in terminals and holotapes throughout the facility. Some of these entries seem to indicate that Eckhart only became Secretary of Agriculture in early 2077, which is noteworthy because it supports the notion that a new administration may have taken power following the 2076 election. I mean, if Eckhart is only appointed a cabinet position at the beginning of the year, it's very likely that he's just one of several new secretaries coming into the Oval Office following the rise of a new presidency. It's entirely possible that this is just coincidental timing. Maybe he's just replacing some guy who resigned or didn't want to play ball with the Enclave, but I think it's worth specifying. Now, where things in Fallout 76 start to get real explosive as far as we're concerned is with the upcoming Skyline Valley expansion. Skyline Valley is an expansion for the game, set to release officially on all platforms this June, and will unlock a new region of Appalachia for players to explore, seamlessly integrated into the existing map. While the expansion is, again, not officially launching until this June, it's actually live right now on the PC's public test server for beta play, and most of the content is functional. Bear in mind, 76's public test server is a proper test server. The whole thing is built around gathering feedback and patching bugs early. So you're gonna see a few missing textures and improperly rendered assets in gameplay on screen, but that comes with the territory. Anyway, within the new Skyline Valley region, there's this location called Big Meadows Gas Well, a still-burning natural gas tower occupied mostly by mole rats and men who will be very hostile to you. Now, the top of this gas tower is almost inaccessible. There's no way to climb up it or access it without a very powerful jetpack and perhaps a 300% increase in jump height in world settings. But if you combine those two, or by some miracle do manage to get up here normally, you'll find a small sniper's nest, with the skeletal remains of the aforementioned sniper. On a ledge, kinda meshed into the ledge on my case, welcome to the PTS server, no biggie, is a note titled, Orders. It reads, quote, by order of Bagman. Target, Zeus. Target location, Rapidan Complex. Long live the American way. God bless America. By orders of Bagman. Remember that name? It's the same executive who authorized the nuclear launch at Fort Constantine. What in Adam's name is his name doing popping up in Skyline Valley? Why is he giving this sniper orders? Well, some more context can be found in the old foreman terminals that dot the gas site. On Deputy Foreman Nathan Davidson's terminal, awesome name, there's an entry titled Employee Report, which reads, Reason for report, antisocial behavior / possible communist sympathizer. Employee name, Harold Osborne. Mr. Osborne is a recent employee. Having joined the company 5 months ago, he was hired as a general laborer, helping construct and maintain the gas extraction platform. A quiet individual, normally keeping to himself, however, has lately started completely ignoring his coworkers unless he's been given a task to complete. Within the last few weeks, he's been spotted climbing up to the top of the tower rather frequently during his shifts. One employee stated they had witnessed him at the top of the tower during the weekend, when the site was meant to be closed. When confronted with these accusations, Mr. Osborne is stated on record saying that they are untrue and that he is a true patriot. It's unclear why he immediately alluded to patriotism, but it has been flagged by management as evidence that Mr. Osborne may be a communist sympathizer. Management has requested that we keep a close eye on him and to contact the proper authorities if we find any definitive proof of Mr. Osborne's communist sympathies. So, according to this undated terminal, about 5 months before the bombs fell, the company hired a man named Harold Osborne as a general laborer, and noted his quietness and strange enthusiasm for trying to get to the top of the gas tower. Management figures he might be a communist or something, but I think we know what's going on. Before the Great War, Harry Osborne, if that's his actual name, was sent to this worksite as a sort of sleeper agent by the US government, or perhaps a faction within the government, and just before the bombs fell, likely as they were falling, a government agent, possibly the president himself, codenamed Bagman, ordered him to take a shot at Zeus near the Rapidan complex. Mr. Osborne was then presumably abandoned by his handlers afterwards and left to rot on the gas well after the job was done and the bombs started to fall. Okay, so who is Zeus? What about this target of Osborne's? Did he succeed? Well, if we just follow the direction the sniper is pointing, straight ahead on a nearby road, we'll find what seems to be some sort of ruined government convoy that Harry was likely fixated on. A large black limousine-like car lies abandoned, surrounded by skeletons and military fatigues, and flanked on both sides by military jeeps. One skeleton, in particular, has a black suitcase next to it, and it appears one of the soldiers was trying to get him a stim pack before he too was taken down. This may very well have been Harry's target, and the man with the briefcase may very well have been Zeus. They're right in the line of fire, right where Harry was aiming. It makes perfect sense. The nature of this convoy leads me to suspect that Zeus was some sort of high-ranking politician or businessman who Bagman clearly had a problem with. But who? And why? A call sign like Zeus implies huge significance. The patriarch of the Greek pantheon's name isn't awarded very lightly. Back at the Enclave compound underneath White Springs, there's this one terminal entry that lists various Enclave members who were set to arrive and receive an early warning about the bombs. And several names on that list seem to have been removed at the last minute. Among the prominent figures evidently kicked out of the Enclave are the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Commerce, and even the Attorney General. Each of these individuals seems to have gotten on the Enclave's bad side, and would have certainly been escorted with a similar security detail when things started to erupt. My money right now is personally on the Speaker of the House. Like, that person's arguably the most important dude in Congress, and a designation like Zeus would make sense. They are the patriarch of the House of Representatives. It fits in nicely. And again, clearly on the Enclave's bad side. Oddly enough, though, this same White Springs terminal has 2 entries for emergency signals that were directed to the president. One was received, and the asset was proceeding to a location called PR_002, which is presumably the Poseidon rig, but the other presidential warning was sent and no confirmation ever received. Was one of these sent to the president and the other the vice president? If that's the case, why not designate the VEEP properly? It's weird and makes me kinda sus, and in a minute here, you're gonna get even more sus. Things are about to get crazier. You see, this convoy was ambushed well en route to the Rapidan complex. Just down the road a little ways. They barely missed it. Rapidan is an old estate, originally built in the Shenandoah Valley by President Herbert Hoover in the 1930s, so he and his wife could enjoy nature once in a while, and after Hoover left office, he donated the property to the executive branch of the American government, allowing future presidents to use it at their leisure. And something shady is afoot here in 76. When we arrive, the property's central structure, dubbed the Brown House, will be inhabited exclusively by a head robot butler named Gumley, who will be non-hostile and is obsessed with maintaining the flower garden. There will be some other robots on site, presumably for maintenance and security, but they will be hostile. Take a listen to what Gumley has to say about the authorized personnel on this site.
Oh, goody. I do love answering questions about President Hoover's home away from home. It's been years since I've had anyone ask. Well, yes. President Hoover and his wife Lou Hoover built Rapidan Camp. They used the grounds as their presidential retreat throughout his administration. When his term came to an end, President Hoover donated Rapidan Camp to the executive wing of the government, so future presidents could continue to use the camp and enjoy the natural beauty of Shenandoah National Park. Sometimes our presidents still stay here, but one hasn't visited in quite some time. From what I can remember, some undersecretaries were stationed here on that eventful day, but I haven't seen them for some time now.
On the top floor of the Brown House is an office for someone clearly of executive stature, decorated with several presidential seals and some unworkable terminals. And in the basement, well, take a look at the basement. There's an entrance to some kind of bunker that's sealed off, its door destroyed and blocked, and sitting in front of a desk is a soldier's skeleton, a soldier who may have made himself into a skeleton, if you catch my meaning. The terminal on the desk reads, quote, Rapidan Camp Bunker Terminal, property of the United States military. All new personnel looking to access the Rapidan Bunker Complex must complete the following steps. Hand over a government-issued ID to the nearest stationed MP. MP must verify government ID. If the ID is verified, please print a Rapidan Bunker access code. Depending on personnel security clearance, please make sure the personnel is aware of restricted areas. So, there's some sort of bunker that we can't get into beneath the Brown House. And here's what's been driving me crazy. You see, when the PTS first dropped on PC in mid-April, some players were actually able to glitch behind the broken door and into that secret bunker. And what they found was incredible. A massive US military bunker complete with a host of exclusive assets and very well furnished. It's around maybe half or two-thirds the size of White Springs, which is utterly massive, and featured several allusions to the Enclave, including a series of clocks displaying the times at Raven Rock, Poseidon Oil Rig, and a yet unrevealed Enclave site at Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. I'll leave links in the description down below to videos on the location by Rifle Gaming and Saxony, who offer full run-throughs of the facility, absolutely worth watching if you're interested. However, I can't actually give you a full tour of it personally, because when someone in the Fallout 76 PTS Discord asked one of the devs about the location, their response was, "Oops, that's not supposed to be in the game right now!" And they scrubbed the area from the PTS within a day or two. The area is now totally gone, and even if you manage to glitch through the bunker door, now you'll just fall into an aimless void. So we have no idea what's going on down there. Bethesda has specified that the area will actually not even be playable at official launch of Skyline Valley. So it's blocked off even in June when the expansion goes live, saved for a later date presumably. All we can say definitively is that there is a massive Enclave bunker buried beneath the Brown House at Rapidan Complex that Bethesda accidentally let us get a sneak peek at. It gets even better though. Also on the Rapidan Complex is another cabin, called the Prime Minister's Cabin. Historically, it's used to host guests of honor, particularly British Prime Ministers, when they visit the President here. Within 76's Prime Minister's Cabin, there's a note titled, "Welcome to Camp Rapidan," and it reads, quote, "Welcome to the Rapidan camp. On behalf of the President of the United States, we hope that you enjoy your stay as our special guest of honor. You'll find the kitchen stocked with everything you may need during your stay, including your favorite tea brand in the loose variety. British? Just ask your allocated Mr. Handy if you get a bit peckish. The President is expected to arrive at around 4 p.m., and dinner is expected at around 6 p.m. We have venison steak with port sauce and Victoria sponge cake for dinner. In the meantime, feel free to explore the grounds and enjoy the beauty of Shenandoah National Park." The President is expected to arrive at 4 p.m. Isn't he supposed to be on the Poseidon Energy oil rig? You could say, "Oh, Nate, maybe this is an old note," but there's no reason it would be left out so late. It should have been thrown away as soon as the Prime Minister left. This note highly implies that the President of the United States, and for that matter, perhaps the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, were both scheduled to be at the Rapidan complex right around the time the bombs began to fall. Now, it's possible that maybe the President lied to the PM, maybe the President asked the Prime Minister to meet him at Rapidan and just never intended to show up personally. Maybe Zeus was that Prime Minister. That makes perfect sense, right? Leader of a country, Zeus, there you go. But also, remember that White Springs terminal? One early warning signal to a president did not receive confirmation, and their status is MIA. So, maybe the Big Cheese showed up after all. At the very least, a Prime Minister may have been at the camp when the Great War broke out. Something to bear in mind is that we don't actually know for sure if Harold Osborn managed to take out Zeus anyway. Like, we see the ambushed convoy, but there's only one skeleton there that isn't in military fatigues. Presumably, there could have been more people in tow. In fact, there should have been more people in tow. That's a big limousine who could have escaped after the attack began. Nothing at all confirms the skeleton with the suitcase is Zeus. So this is where we're at right now. Fallout 76's Skyline Valley PTS features what is, in my opinion, one of the most exciting mysteries in the game. There are direct allusions, well, I guess accidentally direct allusions to huge pieces of upcoming content that Bethesda accidentally leaked. There's something going on with a Prime Minister at Camp Rapidan. There was a guy at a tower nearby ordered by Bagman, presumably the President, but we're not really sure, who was supposed to take out a target named Zeus. We don't know who Zeus is. Could have been the Speaker of the House, could have been the Prime Minister. It's absolutely insane, and I haven't had this much fun diving into a Fallout mystery in a very long time. Maybe since the first time I did a Dunwich breakdown back in like 2019, 2020, something like that. It's been a very good time over here at Epic Nate Enterprises. But all good things must come to an end sooner or later, including today's investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, we started this video running through old Galaxy News radio, like holodisks talking about president affairs and the Poseidon Energy oil rig, and we have ended at the site of one of the most intricate and exciting places Fallout has yet to officially reveal. Hopefully in June, when the update officially launches, there will be a bit more content. Normally, the official release following the PTS contains a bit more content, and that'll present an opportunity to elaborate. But again, remember, Bethesda already clarified that that big secret Enclave bunker isn't going to be a part of it, so who knows what they're planning to do with that and when. Whatever happens, whenever Bethesda gets around to it, whether it's, in 6 months or 6 years, I'll be around to let you know. Thanks so much for stopping by, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like ratings are, as always, very much appreciated. Leave a comment down below what you're thinking is going on. I'm generally confused and just baffled at what's going on. Since this is a PTS that hasn't gone official yet, very few people are actually aware of this Skyline Valley stuff. So my hope is that this video will inspire much of the community to go out searching for itself. Now, hopefully this makes us all conscious of what's going on, and clues that I miss can be found, because frankly, Skyline Valley is huge. It's not even fully out yet, and there's definitely some stuff I missed, and I can't wait to find out what it was. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.